Hello and welcome to another episode of Metal Effort. My name's Nehemiah, and today we're going to be looking at this piece of metal, the We Knives Roxi. This is a part of the YouTube pass around. So Zelric, who designed the knife, or in partnership designed the knife, actually provided this one for us to get a look at. So I just want to say thank you to him, let you know where the knife is from. Let's use some size comparisons. This knife definitely surprised me in the size category. It wasn't something that I really had a correct perception on. The angular kind of boxy design of the Roxi, I think, tricked my mind into thinking that it must be a thick and large knife, even though I knew the edge was pretty short. And so, having the PM2 here and the Pair 3, it's definitely a shorter, blade stock than the Pair 3, much smaller cutting edge. Finger choil is about the same in size here, which is kind of of note. Ergonomics actually are very similar to the Pair 3. The thing I was surprised by is just how thin the knife actually is. So let's compare this here. Let's also get a measurement of the thickness of the knife, not counting the pocket clip. You're under half an inch with the pocket clip. Obviously, you're going to be a lot more. I think the most interesting comparison is next to the half track. You've got, kind of finger choil, sort of. You have, kind of a burly, big, thickness on your blade stock. You have similar length for your fingers, similar thicknesses. I think it's really, size-wise, I think this is a very fair comparison between the two knives. It's especially interesting given the cost. This is $425. This is $250-ish. So, kind of with that in mind, I think we should get into our review here. Let's get into the dent, the decent, the excellent, the nitpick, and the terrible of this piece of metal. First thing is the size for the knife. It is something that is much thinner and smaller than you would normally think without sacrificing much. So weight-wise, let's do a quick comparison on that, because I think, it seems like a gigantic knife, but it's under 4 ounces, which I think is good. It's definitely not under an ounce and inch. And just to give you an idea of how much like the half track weighs, I think that's also a good comparison. This is over 4 ounces. So comparing the two, the Roxi wins that, which is good to know. Next is the fuller. Now, both these knives actually have a fuller, and I don't want to completely compare this each time, but there's so many similarities here, but I just think the Roxi is pulling it off better in general. Because you have a fuller here, which, is going to collect crud just like on the half track. The difference being is there's enough of a ledge here, and just the placement of it actually works really, really well for the spider flick. Surprisingly well. I used the knife for probably half an hour before I realized I could actually flick it this well. I was just using the flipper tab to open the knife, which is obviously an option. But this is not something you can do on the half track, and it's surprisingly satisfying to flick it with this fuller. You have to be careful of where you do it. If you try to do it down here, it doesn't quite give you the same kind of authority on your flicking, and you have to really concentrate to do it. It can be done, I feel like, right at the midway point, maybe where the jimping starts is probably the best place for it in terms of, finger mechanics and getting that to come out. I kind of like this, this is more practical, more meaningful to me to have a fuller here if it's not sacrificing, where my thumb is resting. Because again, on the half track, that's being just arbitrarily risen up compared to the rest of the knife. So it kind of feels awkward, where this has more of a straight, swooping, not straight, but a cleaner line, and your thumb just wants to fall right there. So it doesn't feel like it's awkwardly high because of it, but you still have plenty of space from here, which is effectively where the grind is starting to get down to a pretty fine edge on such a stout blade. I think that's actually something really cool that they were able to pull off. Speaking of the jimping, you just got 3 jimps here. It's sharp enough that your finger stays where it should. So in terms of, doing what it's supposed to do, it totally does it. And, this false edge here, the kind of swedge type thing that's going on, it's not too sharp. It doesn't matter if you decide to put your thumb way up here for some reason. It's not too uncomfortable, but naturally it's going to want to fall right on the jimping, which is good. Not a lot of knives aren't actually designed. I feel like everybody has different hands, obviously, but I feel like mine are like perfectly average. It wants to fall right there, which is where it should be, and the jimping works. It does what it's supposed to do. Another thing I like is what I'm calling the thumb hammock. So you've got right here, there's some chamfers in the inside of the scales. So this is kind of reminiscent of, a lot of knives. It gives your finger a place to rest when you're holding it. If you want to come back here, you can. But more than anything, when you're going to flip the knife, it's giving your finger a place to kind of land without having, sharp edges right there. So it's kind of pulling double duty. I think my thumb naturally wants to be up here, not down here. But it kind of, it's doing its job. And I think if this was just sharper or straighter, it would be a lot more uncomfortable to both flip or hold the knife. If you happen to like move up here, it might not be super comfortable. So good design there, good execution by Wii. Next thing I like is the lanyard hole, and this is kind of a clever way to do it. So you can go, loop through here all the way to the other side if you want, but they also give you like a little sunroof here. So if you want to just do it on one side, depending on the thickness or kind of lanyard that you have, because the knife is so thick at the lanyard, it might not work that well to loop it through all the way. It gives you options here, and I think aesthetically it doesn't really modify the look of the knife or getting in the way. The clip is still pretty deep carry considering, and I don't feel like these two are really fighting for room or space. I would be interested to see what the clip would have been like here as opposed to here. But I'm sure that it's close enough that it wouldn't matter. And I think having your clip center mass probably, helps it sit in your pocket a little bit more straight. So this is probably the correct call. And I don't feel like I resent the lanyard hole being there. I think it's pretty cool design, looks good, and is functional. It's a good solution to the problem. I really like the hardware. You've got 3 screws on each side going into this back spacer. I don't know if you need that many. I think this might be more of an aesthetic touch than anything, having that many screws. But at least they look nice. Kind of gives the knife some, industrial look to it, some futuristic design. I like the anodization on the hardware, just kind of bronze, gives it that little bit of classy look. Although I kind of wish that they did the same thing on the pivot. Pivot kind of seems out of character with the rest of the knife, but it's fine. I like what's here, and I think it looks good. And, if you have too many screws, I guess that's better than not enough. Last thing in the decent is just the fit and finish. The fit and finish is pretty solid, perfectly centered. Most things, enough things to make it into the decent are chamfered where they should be. You have, chamfering here, you have chamfering here. It's really easy to get to the lock bar. All these sharp, otherwise would be sharp edges are all, really well taken care of. Dobby the house elf did a really good job on this, for the most part. So good job. Now let's get into excellent. I have, first thing is the action. So the OCD, the open, close, disengage in the wrong order. Let's run through it. So open, we've got the flipper tab and we have the aforementioned flick. Both work fantastically with this detent. The detent is dialed in. I would say they are 100% equally pleasurable and correctly operating for both opening apertures, opening options, I should say. Fantastic. Because I like flipping and flicking the two most, and the detent is perfectly dialed in for both, I gotta give this a 10 out of 10. Like, this is really satisfying to do either one, and I can basically alternate between the two and be equally happy. It's just like my Chipotle burritos. I love chicken. I love steak. I always get half and half. I love them both. And here it lets me do the same thing. Very, very well done. On the disengage, I've got the double chamfer here, little grooves. So it's really easy for me to come in vertically and then move horizontally. There's 0 lock stick. This is very pleasurable. The flipper tab catches your thumb, and then little jostle to get it going. We'll talk more about the close. But the disengage, I think, is solid. If this was down a little bit, it would break the lines, but I like having a little bit more room on this scale to get in on this one. So we'll call this a 9.5 out of 10 as far as disengage goes. It's not very difficult to get the D10 ball onto the tangled blade. That happens basically right away. So no problems there. Now, the close. So once the D10 ball is on the tang of the blade, it's like 1.5 jostles, I would say. One strong one, but normal ones, maybe 2, 1 strong. So this isn't like amazing. It's definitely not free folly, but still solid. Very, very good. Give it a 8.5 out of 10 on the close. Definitely could be a lot better, but not really anything that's annoying me. I can get a close with one hand, and I'm not trying to get it closed. It's fine. Last excellent thing I have is the ergonomics, and I kind of saved the best for last, even in spite of the really good action that this knife has. And this is subjective, and I'm always hesitant to put the ergonomics in the excellent section because it's so subjective. But again, I have average size hands, so I don't know, maybe it's a little bit bigger than me, a little bit smaller than me. I think that will still translate to really good ergonomics. What's happening here, I don't know how intentional this was, but the end result is amazing nonetheless. So when you grip the knife, it like perfectly fits in my hand cave here, and my pinky is on the other side of this. And it doesn't want to fall off. It's so wide here that I don't feel like it's getting, squished off, or it doesn't have anything to grab onto. Instead, it kind of locks my hand grip in. I've got something here, and it's kind of pinning the knife where it should be. You got effectively a palm swell because you have, it's getting wider here, narrower here, and it just naturally fits extremely well. I mean, it's so dialed in. You have your index finger and middle finger are anchoring it here. You have your pinky and your ring finger anchoring the knife here. And so it just fits. It fits really, 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 really good. I feel more connected to this than I do even the Pair 3, which I would think would feel locked in. But having this come a little bit higher here, the little point, gives me a little bit more stability right there on the Roxi. And so comparing the two, this is good. This is solid. I mean, this is like, a 9.3 out of 10 on the Pair 3. But man, I mean, this is competing with my Conegarius in terms of just how comfortable it is in the hand. And, this is such a big knife, but in terms of what my hand is actually grabbing onto, if I take right here as the starting point, of counting that finger choil, it's very similarly, sized. I got a little bit of extra space on the areas that I'm not normally using anyway. So, man, that is definitely the most surprising thing about this knife. For such an angular kind of futuristic look, you might be scratching your head being like, oh yeah, but what is it like holding it? It kind of looks like a brick, with just chunks taken out of it. Not the case. Very, very, very ergonomical. If you have the right hand, I guess, normal hands, quote unquote. Normal. Next thing we're going to talk about is the nitpicks. And this one is, again, minor, I guess, and hence the nitpickiness of it. But there's no sharpening choil on this. You have the finger choil, which is not extended into being the actual choil. There are knives that do that, but obviously people are worried about slipping forward and cutting themselves. So there's a little bit of a hook here. and there's, definitely not a sharpening choil. So in the long run, I think this is going to develop a little bit of a smile. Same problem I have on the Para 3 and the PM2. Not a big deal. If you go finger choil, you're shrinking up your cutting edge considerably. So most knives that you see that have a finger choil don't also have a sharpening choil. But that's not necessarily, a free ride. There is a cost to not having a sharpening choil here. Small thing. Next thing is the jimping. Now, the jimping locks in just fine, but you'll notice there's a fair amount of human remains left here. It's sharp enough that you're just going to get a bunch of crud in there. Not a big deal. It's big enough that you could probably clean it out with a Q-tip, no problem, but it is going to collect you. Next thing is on this fuller, you have pretty decent chamfering in most places, except for this grind right here. This is pretty sharp. If you're moving it, the wrong way, kind of material this way, whether it be in your pocket when you're trying to fit it into your clothes, sometimes it can kind of catch up on this little snag-a-rooski here. There's a little bit of a chamfer on it, but it just needs to be a little bit more. There's just enough of a little hook right there that you can kind of see what I'm talking about right there and right there. Wouldn't have noticed it if it wasn't for catching on stuff, so not a big deal, but it's there. Now, on the pivots, this is a non-free spinning pivot, which is good. There's a little shelf in there that's keeping it from spinning. I do notice it's a little off-center. This has been happening on several of the Wii knives, so I guess it just depends on, what you're aligning it to. Do you align it to the blade? Do you align it to the handle? Kind of a mix of the two. I feel like this isn't really aligned to anything. It's not super off-center, but still, it's not straight, and it kind of bothers me considering the blade is, got so many parallel lines. It would make sense to line it up to that, but what do I know? Last thing, and this is kind of subjective, but I have anecdotal evidence of just asking several people in the lunchroom, does this look scary to you? And the answer was, yeah. And so then I was like, wait a minute, do all knives look scary to you? So going through like pictures of knives, and they're like, no. So I think there's something to be said about just the angle of, the sharpness of like a Wharncliffe. I think to a knifeful, a non-knife folk, it can look a little scary. So if you're taking this to the office or somewhere that, isn't full of knife nuts, you might get a little bit of a raised eyebrow. And that's a factor for some people, depending on your lifestyle and where you're carrying your knife. Again, not a huge deal, just something to consider, depending on what circumstance you're going to be in. I don't really have anything in the terrible section, so let's get into the conclusion. The conclusion is I like this knife way more than I thought I was going to. The biggest thing that I imagined being not good is the ergonomics. Turned out to be some of the best ergos I've had in a knife in a while. And so, incredibly small knife that fits really well and then has a very useful Wharncliffe blade. I think that all adds up to be pretty good. I mean, we're using M390 steel, we have titanium, great action, fantastic action, and it all adds up to be a really good value. I think kind of saving this for the last, I couldn't decide if I want to put it in the nitpick or in the excellent here, but I just kind of wrap it up in the conclusion. This is $150, and so this is $250, and comparing that to our $425 half track, to kind of come full circle here, the value on this knife is off the charts, and this, even though I really like the half track, that price is just really kind of souring my take on this. And then, getting this knife in my hands and reviewing it kind of reinforced that idea that this just costs too much, and this is a great value. And the problem here is this was made in China, designed by an American, but made in China. This is designed by an American, made in America. I don't really feel that strongly about made in America or whatever. I have viewers from all over the world. Clearly, more than just Americans are interested in knives. I really just am pro humans, I guess. And so I don't know what to make of this. Is it something that if Hinderer lowered the price on this, he just stops making money? It's very possible. The labor that he's putting into that, the materials kind of add up to where it's just not a profitable thing. Maybe he's just in a bind and he can't make these knives cheaper. I don't know. It could also be that he can price these better, but he knows if they sell at this higher price, he's making a better profit. All that to say is we're voting with our dollars, whether you mean to or not. I think this is a better value, and I am totally going to buy one of these. I have to ship this out to the next person, but I'm going to buy my own, and it'll probably be a part of my permanent collection. I like it that much. So even not comparing it to something that I feel like is overpriced and just judging the knife on its own merits, I think this is a fantastic value. It's unique. It's got that futuristic angular look. It's practical. It's comfortable. The action is great. There is a lot to like about this knife. I think it's dang near a complete package. It's a little bit heavy for this small of a blade, but still better than others. So I'm going to give it a pass on that. That's my official recommendation. Buy the knife if you've got the funds, if you can make that happen. I think you'll be really pleased with it. Hope this was helpful for you. I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye.